Well, welcome everybody. We're going to get started here. Thank you all for coming. There's a few more people that are en route, and so when they come in, we're going to welcome them as well. But my name is Nile Malloy. I am the Senior Program Manager at the Neighborhood Funders Group. I manage a program called Democratizing Development Program. Just wanted to do a quick kind of before I go deeper into who the Neighborhood Funders Group and the program I manage. I just want to give a big thank you to some of our core partners. Some of our core partners have been Pittsburgh United. Alex, who is en route, and his whole team has been very helpful in trying to bringing us all together. Also, Heinz Endowments, Ford Foundation, and also the Colorado Trust. Without them, this event wouldn't be possible. And so I really want to thank everybody for their leadership and showing up and helping us make this happen. And there's also some other individuals that I want to get a shout out. Elizabeth Voigt, who probably don't want to shout out, but she's always like someone in the background who's been helping coordinate. And then also my colleague Shannon, who's actually at the registration. It's really been a team effort. And so we have heard that there are several people who are en route who couldn't make it. There's a couple folks from New York couldn't make it from the Ford Foundation and others. Because of weather. Can you believe it? I mean, a 1-hour flight and there's a big storm. So there's maybe a few other individuals who may join us over the next few days. So this event, Strategy Action Learning Tour, looking at equitable revitalization and regional power building in Pittsburgh, has been pretty much a work in progress. There's been a lot of people who've been involved with trying to make this happen, make this possible, particularly around looking at regional power building and thinking about this political moment with the current administration and what's going on. We really wanted to bring funders and community partners, all of you, into a room to really talk about looking at Pittsburgh as a model of the work that is happening on the ground from community organizing at the local, regional, and state level, but also looking at issues around race, equity, and economic justice. And so when we think about the intersections of all that work, this is kind of why we're convening this group to really learn together and build together. A few other points too that I want to mention. My organization, the Neighborhood Funders Group, the Neighborhood Funders Groups actually work with funders. We are a national affinity group of funders that pretty much help organize funders and engage funders around the issues around equity, social justice, and economic justice work. We have a few key programs. The program I manage is called Democratizing Development. Who can say, who can anybody in the room think about what does democratizing development mean? Anybody, any ideas? Shout out, yes.
Hopefully people have a say in what's happening in their community.
People have a say in what's happening in their community, right? Give her a hand clap. All right. So we know this has been happening, community-led base building strategies and looking at development. And so we want to ensure that we have resources and investment that's supporting community-based organizations and institutions who are engaged and revitalizing their communities and also at the table, being more in the center versus on the margins. So that's kind of where the democratizing development has been building up. It's in a program that's been started, been around for a while. It used to be the Housing Justice Working Group at NFG, but more or less it's an opportunity to look at economic development issues around looking at anti-displacement, looking at gentrification issues, and how do we look at strategies and solutions around those work. So I'm really excited about being a part of this work, and it's been really fun moving this work forward. A couple of little quick announcements. We do have video in the background for those who have not filled out this photo video consent form. Definitely fill out one in the back. If you don't want your face in any videos, definitely let us know. But more or less, we're going to be videotaping this 3-day convening at different junctures. So day 1 is our welcome reception. I'm glad you are here. Day 2, we're meeting up with funders in the morning and having like a learning tour, looking at different parts of Pittsburgh, lifting up the solutions and the stories from the community on the work that they've been moving forward, particularly around gentrification displacement, but also worker rights, worker justice, and economic justice related issues. And then on the last day, for those who can stick around, we're going to have another kind of strategy conversation talking about multiracial kind of organizing, looking at coalition building, and what does that mean in this political moment, and why we need to be building and working across issues and intersectionally So this is kind of like the 3-day convening that we put together with NFG and our partners. It's something that we try to do more often in different places, but in Pittsburgh we thought it was really unique and also timely, thinking about what's going on right now. Before I jump in terms of like thinking about our few key speakers, we have a lineup of several speakers that will be sharing a little bit more context about Pittsburgh. Obviously, I can give my little drop in the bucket, but it's like a tip of the iceberg. But also, we want to make sure that the leadership of the community is really represented. And so we have a few key speakers who's going to be sharing more or less about what the work is. So our first speaker is Rob here? Hey, Rob. So I'm going to bring you up, Rob, represent the Heinz Endowment. And Rob Stephany is the Director of Economic and Community Development. And welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks so much. Thank you guys for that lukewarm reception. I
know, right?
Woo! It's for those folks who know me, it's well deserved. Welcome to Pittsburgh. How many people are not from Pittsburgh? How many people are traveling? Well, welcome. The weather is always like this, except for when it's not. Thanks, my Pittsburghers already throw me under the bus. Let me just say, I hope the next 2 days go really well. You know, they say the most important piece of learning is to realize you don't know everything, right? And it's to listen and it's to share as much as you can. And I would hope that there's real opportunities between and during where some real issues can be confronted. The nuances of power, and you guys swim in it, but the nuance of power ranges from ennobling folks to giving bureaucrats, well-intended bureaucrats, the space they need to navigate, taking power, and you can question this one, and giving it. And what is that process? And the true organizers out in the room stop shaking their head at giving power, and I appreciate that. There's real nuance in all of this stuff. I think having funders and community advocates and organizers walking the same streets is the most important piece of this puzzle over the next couple of days. The heroes are the grassroots engagers. We are constantly humbled by the work you do, by the work of Penn and by the work of Barney Shop and everybody else. That's the heroes' work. I say that only in as much as sometimes folks who provide the capital like to actually take credit for the work, and only if it's good. I do want to bring. You're coming to Pittsburgh at really an important time. We're kind of in a midlife crisis. We have experienced some success that other Rust Belt cities haven't experienced. We're really nervous about what sustaining that success might or might not mean in a globalizing economy, and we are feeling on every day that we have built a machine that may in fact be leaving people behind in the process. And that doesn't feel acceptable. It just doesn't feel acceptable. And so I think being really purposeful about this. You're not in Pittsburgh to see the finished product. You're in Pittsburgh to share in our struggle. And it is a struggle that I hope we live. Those drivers, eds, meds, financial services, technology, we are seriously asking the question of what is the future for educated people in this town, and what is the future for folks who don't have that same education level. And it's a palpable issue. We are all struggling, I think, with what the role of philanthropy is in power building. We have a partner in this with the Pittsburgh Foundation, our community foundation. And there's just a little interplay that we do, right? They make a little grant. That gives us some cover to make a grant. And so you guys build coalitions. I think that one of the most important things that's happening here today is that there's a coalition of funders happening too. That provides some cover and space to move above and beyond strategic reluctance and into something that might have a lot more bravado. let me see. I want to end in an odd way of tapping the mouse pad just for an irrelevant picture. Just want to acknowledge Matt Barron. I'm in part exposing here because I want the next 3 days to be, what is it that you know you're good at? What is it that you're struggling with? Provide a criticism and then provide some construction around that so that we can get to some real dialogue. Let's not have that happen on the third day. Let's have that happen while you're walking to the next endeavor. Matt Barron is my colleague at the Heinz Endowments, and just to give you a sense, we have a board of directors. We have some people at the executive and director level, and Matt is at a program level. And Matt keeps it honest. He keeps it intellectually challenging. He hates the spotlight, so he's blushing. But I think our foundations, I think our organizations, I think this next frontier of leadership is worth acknowledging and being inspired by. I'm talking for my Heinz Endowments folks who are nodding their head. Yes, a big nod to Matt. So with one last word about respecting organizers, Carl right now is organizing you all against me to make a grant to the consensus group, the Hill District consensus group, just to give you a sense that it's all happening at the same time. He's going to win that. He's going to win that argument, just so you know. All right. With that, so learn, share, expose yourself, and learn some more. We appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
I love how Rob just kept it real in a very direct way. That was really refreshing. Thank you for doing that. And Carl also has organized me as well. So good work, Carl. So we have a few key speakers, and I think the points that Rob really I think resonates with, like the point of this convening, to really trying to sharpen our sword, but also engage and have dialogue with one another. So I just want to keep inviting folks to really try to, how do we actually be transparent with the challenges that we're facing, the solutions that were in our back pocket, and also the strategies that we're trying to invoke and implement. How do we look at those things? How do we have more dialogue about those things in real time? So I just encourage more of that. And with that said, I'm actually going to start looking at it. We have a few good presenters. Really excited about being in this space, you know, the United Steelworkers. So I want to thank you for hosting us, Fred and his team. So our first presenter is going to be Fred Redmond. He is the International Vice President of United Steelworkers. And I don't think I need to say anything else because everyone's clapping before I say that. So no more bio.
Well, good evening, everybody. My job this evening is to welcome you, and I welcome you to the Steelworkers International Headquarters. This building used to belong to IBM. If you notice on the grates by the window, the floorboards, those are the old IBM computer punch things that they used to use. And we moved into this building in 1971. And in 1973, we tried to organize IBM workers, so they moved out. And we bought the building. And I just want to welcome you, because this is indeed, this facility is the House of Labor. You know, our doors is always open, not just to labor organizations, but to our community partners and allies, because we feel a connection to this community, because Steelworkers are Pittsburgh. This is our home. And we wear very proudly the mantle of being one of only two major unions in this country that maintain their headquarters at their birth of origin. And it's the Steelworkers and Auto Workers. You know, we was born in this city, and our first union charter was issued in 1946, and we wear that distinctively. So we are part of this community and have always felt a part of the community. But the Steelworkers Union, we are the largest industrial manufacturing union in North America. We boast 1.3 million active and retired members. We participate and have members in every aspect of industrial manufacturing in this country, with the exception of auto assembly. We don't assemble cars, but we are a car union. In this country, we have, in the United States alone, we have 350,000 members who are going to make a part that's going to wind up in an automobile. We represent all the major tire companies, the steel, the aluminum, the glass companies. We make the rubber hoses. We make carburetors. We make parts that wind up in a car. So we're very connected with the automotive industry throughout this country. But look, I am very proud to be here and to also have the Steelworkers to be part. And we have, I think Amanda Green Hawkins was here. She had to leave, but Amanda is represent the Steelworkers Union on the board of Pittsburgh United. And Pittsburgh United is very critical to this community and to our union because the concept of bringing faith leaders, community leaders, and labor leaders, we feel very strongly is the key to rebuilding a social and economic movement. And it's very critical to us in organized labor to be part of a movement for social and economic justice. I mean, it's not that we have all of the answers, okay? We don't. But I think together, and it's only going to be together, is that we're going to be able to address the issues that we're facing, particularly in these serious economic times. So, you know, we're proud to be part of Pittsburgh United. Pittsburgh United have brought to this region a very, very critical component of bringing people together from those three elements of faith, community, and labor, and have offered us the opportunity to dialogue and to try to seek solutions to the problems that we all face in our various communities where we live and work throughout this region. So I just want to let you know that we're here for you throughout your stay. If there's anything that we could do to make your stay better, then just let us know. We'll be around throughout the rest of the evening. I have to sneak out, but some of my staff is on their way to be here with you. But if there's anything that we could do to make your stay better here in Pittsburgh, not too far from here in the city of Homestead, is where our union actually began. And it began with not just the union, which at the time was the Amalgamated Association of Iron and Tin, but they stood with the community, and the community stood with them in order to protect their mill and to stop corporate greed from coming in and destroying their collective bargaining agreement. And we wear that history today as we find ourselves in the same situations that a lot of our members were in, whose shoulders upon we stand over 50 and 60 years ago. This is not just an economic struggle, but this is a struggle for the very soul of our country. And what kind of country are we going to be? And it's Pittsburgh United who has brought us all together to really strategize upon this work because, as I like to say, at this time and in this moment in our history here in the United States, 20 years from now, 15 years from now, 10 years from now, our children and our grandchildren is going to hold us accountable by how we responded during this time in our history. And it's going to take all of us. And I want to thank Barney Osler and his group for their commitment, their steadfast focus toward our goal of economic justice, social justice, and it's only together that the community, the religious community, and organized labor is only if we all work together that we're going to be successful and capture the future for our children and grandchildren. So welcome and have a good time in Pittsburgh. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, and also Fred for the welcome. I'm going to change a little bit the agenda real quick. I just realized we should do something. So here's what we're going to do. We just welcome you. Everyone feel welcome, right? So now it might be a time to just kind of break up. I want you to get up. I want you to meet someone you don't know in the room. Pick two people. Yep, you're going to get up, meet somebody you don't know, two people, name, address, whatever, who you are, what's your background. And the question is, what's inspiring you? What's inspiring you? Think about that question. Yeah, where you from? I'm from Pittsburgh. Just touch base with folks. You know, it's really about building community, right? The work that we're doing right now is connecting the dots. And so I know I was inspired by the one check-in I had about building community, and the intersectionality of the issues that we all face and work on. So glad we were able to do that. So we're going to come back to another presentation. I'm actually going to have our esteemed presenter, I like saying words like that to get people all nervous and stuff like that, so they got to step up to the plate. But Lauren Jacobs, Deputy Director of the Partnerships for Working Family. She has been an organizer for 20 years. She began organizing factories with Unite in the South and later joined the staff of the SEIU. So I'm just going to stop there. Lauren has an amazing bio, but beautiful to have you. Lauren, I'm going to put your slide up.
Great. Good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I was a little bit, thinking about, well, how do I open given the weekend that we all just had, and actually asked my colleagues, should I really be my full authentic self? And as is our practice internally, they were like, yes. And so I can't say that I don't sit here thinking about that. It was Friday evening as I was sitting in the airport flying back from Milwaukee that I learned about the verdict in the Yanez trial, and that the blow that was dealt Philando Castile and the entire St. Paul, Minneapolis community, and all of us nationally. And this morning that I heard the news about Nabra and Charlena. And I want to just open up and say I really am filled with a very fierce and sense of urgency, because this work is about so much more than a raise or rent stabilization. All those are important, but they're slices. This work is really about who belongs and who is part of that we, the people. So I'm hoping to urge all of us to be as bold and courageous as we can be, and then some more, because so many lives depend on this. So let me get us started and start out localizing, talking. I live in Boston, but much of what's been happening here in Pittsburgh, I grew up in New York City. I've lived a lot of cities, and much of what's happening here in Pittsburgh I've seen before. Many of the people here from out of town are going to be like, oh yeah, I know this, I know how this goes. And so, Pittsburgh today, after years, after seeing steel mills close, loss of many manufacturing jobs, a lot of disinvestment, the growth of poverty in the city, is now sort of a center of a lot of acclaim for being the new Pittsburgh, where lots of investment is happening, the boom times are booming, and probably, ne'er a week goes by that we don't hear about the eds and meds economy and how high tech is, bringing the Steel City back, and that there is the newest hot neighborhood with, I know this, like the cafes and the people walking around and the parks and all the things that, because, this is a story in every city, or many cities. And that's, you're right, it's not anecdotal, it does mirror national trends. But when we go a little deeper, we know that growth, those boom times, are not booming for everyone. And that we are seeing that instead of many of the residents of the cities, be they low income, be they middle income, are actually having their lives made more precarious as a result of these booms and as a result in the increase in displacement. And I want to center this in us really thinking about this and what this means. So these are for families. Here in this city, many of whom are African American, love their neighborhoods, love their communities, believed in this town before Uber did and before UPMC did and before all the new sort of folks are coming, are now having that faith and that investment of their time with their families in their neighborhoods, their years of work in the city, being repaid with them being forced to leave communities where they may have been for generations. And it's one of my biggest pet peeves that we often talk about this as though it's like a natural occurrence, like it's a tornado, right? Like it's just unfortunate that, the boom times are coming and some people are just getting pushed out. That's not what's happening. This is a result of decisions and choices that people are making, and it's a result of a lack of will by some to center values and morality. And that is to really say that we will invest in having an inclusive city, that we will have a city in which there are no boom times unless it's booming for everyone. And that is really sort of the tension here. And I think it is the challenge that all of us here need to rise to, organizers, funders, advocacy leaders, civic leaders, be however we identify. All of us are here today because we care about this picture and care about this divide and bridging it, or actually ending that such a divide could even exist. And so the challenge is how do we get there? So what brings this about? I'm just going to quickly go through this because I think many of you know the story. Here in Pittsburgh, like a lot of other places, wages have stagnated, right? So if you look over this 6-year period here, ne'er arise, that gray line, that's Pittsburgh. I don't even want to, like you can see the red and the dotted blue one, that's blue one is Pennsylvania, the red one is the United States. That's actually a crash. Here they stabilize, but how many people have seen like rents haven't risen? Folks drive cars, they've seen gas go up, food prices go up. So what that actually means, that flat line actually means families are actually losing their purchasing power and actually losing out. And then you combine that with a housing boom that has seen rents in those very dark areas rise as much as 45%. So now let's imagine that. No raise and your rent's almost doubling. We know what the results of that are going to be. And this is not just this is a racialized problem. Just to be straight, that disproportionate to the numbers of the population here, right? African Americans and Latinos are experiencing this type of displacement and rise in the precarity of their living situation at a much faster rate than white residents of the city. So, how do we rise to this challenge? How do we deal with it? So, I think actually the answer lies in looking at what it looks like when we do our work normally, right? So let's just say, I think many of us here have been in fights where we've tried to raise minimum wage, or we've introduced rent stabilization, or even actually I could map this and say this is kind of what happened when New York City had the audacity to say, maybe we don't need to sell people 72-ounce big sodas. If you want that much, you could buy 2, right? Right. So this sort of same thing happens. We have sort of what I think of as a 4-ring circus, right? We have usually a local politician that comes out and says, I don't know about the viability of the proposals and, will it be good for business? And then we have normally a think tank industry type expert that comes out and is like, we've done studies and it will crash the economy. The earth will split open and, and the seas will rise and cover and everything will go bad. And then we have the community organizations that pop up and seem to have none of the funding challenges that any of us do. And they're off and running and all these people are showing up. And then we always have the proverbial small business owner, right? That's oh my God, if this happens, if rent goes up, or if you stabilize rent, my building's gonna end, nobody will rent anymore, or I won't be able to make any business, or if wages go up, I'm never gonna sell another hamburger. That round always happens, right? Does this look familiar to folks? Yeah. Okay. The issue is that oftentimes we sometimes get stuck in sort of chasing one of these, right? And some of this the urgency of we're trying to move, we're trying to get it done, we need to confront whoever's sort of the loudest voice. But if we dig a little deeper, oftentimes we find bigger actors in the background. Who's funding the think tanks? Who's donating to politicians that are constantly on the opposite side of, making a more equitable distribution in our cities? Who is who are the business owners part of a larger association, right? That's got bigger players in it. And I think in that locus is where we can actually start to think a little bit about how do we start tackling these issues at their root core and actually think about how do we start winning across issue areas. And so I want to talk about this and say, it's not just any corporation, right? This is not like sort of the corporations of the 50s I know somebody's going to come out with like the labor history buffs are going to be like, that's not quite accurate, but bear with me. These companies aren't like the Carnegies, where they lived here. There was a reputational cost to behaving in a certain way. Well, kind of. I know Homestead, yes. But people were here, right? We now have been the transformation of capital from an industrial model that was based on a specific business rooted in a specific place with a specific family or owner to a more financial model that you now have shareholders. So instead of one boss, 1,000 bosses, right? Scattered throughout, right? That we have a different sort of look at what is the long-term growth of a company or the importance of a company to short-term growth and dividend booms versus the long-term stability, because people look at these investments as much more short-term in and outs. And for those that are skeptical, I will say this, it really shows up in GDP, right? The fire industry, finance, insurance, real estate, leasing, forget it, messes up my little initial thing, fire, but it is 20% of GDP. So this is like the biggest part of our economy now. It's not manufacturing. It's not all these other things that we once thought of as the big industries. This is that thing where we talk about we're not making things. We're sort of swapping money and debt around. This is it. This is what it looks like. And that has real life consequences and how we get to sort of the housing and wage struggles that we have. So I do want to say, I want to take us through just quickly some of the industries that are big here and some of the new ones nationally that sort of people talk about and say, well, it's different. I actually worked in Silicon Valley for a while, and there are I would say, and I was with the janitors union at the time, and our members actually were very happy to be on the Google campus, and I will not, because it paid a little bit better. There was free snacks, and so there are some things that are different. However, in terms of how these companies interact with the economy, we see the influence of the financial services sector on how the behavior is. So let's just pick this apart. So you have things that we wouldn't normally think about as being monetized, now monetized. So what I mean by this is how many people have Facebook accounts and now like things and love things, and all that's being tracked and sold so that Facebook has better advertising revenue. Disruption is now a new buzzword. It really is sort of code for ending employment obligations in an industry. So we sort of see that with Uber, but we're also starting to see that now with translators. There was just a radio story I was listening to that you have businesses now talking about, we're disrupting translating because we can just pull down, but what it really is taking the aggregate labor of several individuals and making and sort of getting rid of the obligation to pay people for those services. Keeping money in offshore banks, in offshore accounts, and share buybacks are a very common feature in the tech industry. And even just the app-based economy is based on very short-term, what can we mine and what can we make money on right now. So eds and meds are nonprofits. Just to understand, university endowments, there's about $500 billion in endowments in the United States. $100 billion, 20% of that is managed by hedge funds. Sometimes these players in the financial industry are trustees of universities, but even for the ones that aren't, many of these endowments are investment funds that invest in all sorts of real estate and corporations and others, as well as universities in many towns and cities are major landlords. They're also driving how housing has become a commodity. Student debt is a lucrative business for many banks, and that becomes an entryway, as well as consumer debt. Many And I will speak up, I will confess, I was one of these young people that unfortunately got their hand on a credit card at 18. That was the worst thing that ever happened. But that becomes an avenue of revenue for sources here. And I think understanding debt is really critical because it's just understanding how debt is, you can't talk about cities or towns and what is happening to them without talking about how debt's being leveraged. And we see that both in how it affects regular residents from the growth of the payday lending industry. So because people do not make good wages or wages that can support their families, we now have a whole industry that's grown up around, oh, we can get rich off of the fact that, company X or restaurant X is not going to pay people what it should for the work that they put in. Debit cards for payroll are another thing. I witnessed this myself of seeing workers having, that it's not debt in that way, but when people go to use it in certain places, they're getting dinged and sometimes end up with negative account balances on their cards. So constant perpetual debt. Consumer debt, we've already talked about. Subprime mortgages, we know how that went, I'm sure. I don't need to do a primer for this room on that. And then it actually transfers into our government functions. Public authorities taking on debt. And municipal debt, which I think the city knows very much about in terms of how it precipitated the water crisis that is currently facing the city, which I will get to. Sorry, wrong button. So although I know that Pittsburgh maybe in comparison to some other cities, the next area I want to quickly sort of talk about how these issues start to link. And how it becomes harder to sort of deal with them all separately. So I know Pittsburgh did not deal in the same way that other cities did with the foreclosure crisis, but this was a national phenomenon that wiped out about 50% of black wealth nationally. I actually, unfortunately, do not have the numbers of how it eradicated Latino wealth, but I assume that it's similar in number. Home values in black communities have fallen by 41%. As compared to white communities at about 20%. So just double the impact. I mean, this was and at some point I think we have to start saying when we see these same patterns represented, saying that it's disparate impact like it's an accident and sort of say, is it the system keeps being designed to produce these same results? It's not about the people being evil, but at some point we have to say, like, if we see the same thing happening over and over again and your behaviors are producing the same thing and you do nothing to change it, at some point we have to say, well, then you are responsible, right? That is you. So foreclosures happen. It displaces folks, right? Higher rents and banks buying up properties displace folks. And what we're seeing both here in the United States, but also this is a global phenomenon. I kept looking for another synonym for a slum, and I just feel like, well, why? We should just be honest with what is being created. This is globally happening, that there's higher and higher concentrations of poverty in and around cities. Here in the United States, we have a phenomenon that it's actually being moved out to the suburbs. So once in the 70s and 80s, it was the inner city, and now it is the rings and outer. And just to give sort of credence to this, between 2000 and 2013, if you look at the census tracts of areas that have where over 40% live below the poverty rate, the numbers of those areas that exist doubled in that period of time. So this is a growing phenomenon. And when you have a devaluation of housing stock and people are concentrated in areas of poverty, you have an issue with how schools get funded, right? So it creates another revolving crisis again, this is another, in terms of how this plays out with school privatization, we know how this round goes. So the schools don't have money. They cut services. Then, lo and behold, less money, lower performance in terms of the school's ability to educate the students it has. And now, because the public sector is just inefficient on its own, we got to bring in business to increase efficiencies, right? And this is sort of that same round robin that we've seen. This charter schools and the growth of this is a black and brown issue. Of the 50 school districts which are chartered, all but 8 are majority black and Latino. And I did teach school for a very short period of time. But there's just something in me that gets really angry when I hear about stories of charter school administrators talking about we need to increase discipline and, sort of teach consequences to these kids. When I look at how private schools, let kids get away with, there's a lot more openness of like, we need to work with them and, they're just being kids and kids will be kids. And we have a sort of like militaristic style of educating kids that look like me. Here in Pittsburgh, you have an issue where many of the private school population is overwhelmingly white. I don't know the exact history here, but normally when I see this, it follows patterns that you see in cities where the move to private school was a way to avoid school desegregation. So, as another manner here. So, again, you can start to see this link of how you go from debt and how companies are thinking about short-term gains, where can we invest, what's turning quick profit, to things like subprime mortgages that then relate to displacement and people being moved out, right? To then, or on the flip side of what we've seen now is, you're seeing a new bubble being increased with companies like Blackstone Group, which is now the private equity firm, largest single-family home owner in the country. And we're seeing companies like that securitize rental properties. So they're bundling them and turning them into securities that can be sold off and using the mortgages as collateral. So both prices are getting inflated and you sort of look in and go, what could go wrong? Like we didn't remember 2007 and 2008. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. And this same sort of cycle is what got us to the situation here with Pittsburgh and the lead in the water here, where the water district was convinced to enter into bad, toxic rate swaps. They saddled the authority with debt, then which precipitated bringing in a private contractor that was private management firm that was then given license that if you save money, half of it you get to keep. Well, what does that incentivize? Cutting corners. And those corners were cut at the risk of health of the residents and especially the kids of this city. So what do? I think the point here is that no one policy campaign, no one issue is going to tackle all this. It is great, and if you are feeling overwhelmed, then I have succeeded, because that's what I wanted to make the point, is that no one thing on its own is going to fix this, and so what we need to be thinking about is how do we take maximum use of the resources of our movement. That is both the money and the people and the talent and expertise that all of us have gained over time, and some of that's starting to look at the intersections here, right? If I go back to my example of Blackstone, I'm just wanting to point out because I think they're a prime example. You have them as, in many cities, premier owner of office towers. They used to be the premier hotelier with Hilton. They're now the biggest landlord of single-family rental properties in the country, and they're raising $100 billion to start buying off infrastructure. So, rather than all of us sort of going at and jousting at the dragon on our own and trying to see, maybe we can get there, maybe it's about time that we start to think about how do we come together and think about ways in which we can fight on jobs, fight on housing, fight on how infrastructure is built. Is it community driven? Is it a community wealth builder? Or is it something that's going to extract together? And that is a lot of the work here that Pittsburgh United has been leading. And even more so in this moment, how do we think about doing this even bigger and even better than it's been done before, and really looking at these intersections at who is behind the curtain and who is driving on multiple fronts many of the problems that we see. So as I have been here sort of talking about, well, we need to go after people, we need to be very technical and think about research and everything. I don't want to abandon that we also need to have a vision. And I will also say this is that I have been guilty of doing this as an organizer, where I have talked to folks and door knocked and home visited and only talked about a single issue or a single problem. And maybe that works for a period of time, but at the end of the day, it is not a real, full, uncompromising vision of what is the city we want to be in, what is the town, what is the state that is deserving of all the talent and all the humanity and all the richness that the residents here have to offer, right? And I feel that right now, especially looking at the events of November of last year, people know what I'm talking about, that the other side has a narrative and they have a story. They have a narrative of how we got here. They have a story of who's responsible. And it's not the people I was talking about before, right? And they certainly have a vision that does not include many of us in this room. And we must, at this moment, equally embrace and be unafraid to be labeled unrealistic, crazy, dreamers, because it's what is needed in this moment is for people to have hope and to be able to embrace what is at the end of the day, if I'm fighting on minimum wage today, how does that lead to the kind of job that I really should have? Because I think for those of us in labor, we know, yes, wages are important, but it's not the only thing that workers care about, right? I mean, a resident in a neighborhood, a quality home or a rent stabilized home is important, but it's not the only issue. I'm speeding along. I did include this to talk about, and that was sort of the inspiration for calling this Constructing the Beloved City, was to harken back to Dr. King, who I think was, one of the best organizers that we have had in the last 100 years or so in this country. And he really embraced this idea that we must build, and that this wasn't sort of pie in the sky, that this was a real thing that could be achieved, that we can build and construct a community in which poverty, racism, and militarism are so abhorrent to human decency that the society would never allow them to occur. And that is what I sort of want to speak to today, is that we need to point at who's really to blame and really sort of put our work to extracting what we need from them and wresting power away. But we also need to embrace and point towards and say that it really there can be a Pittsburgh in which everybody has shelter and quality shelter. And that work is not just about going and getting 15 or 16 or 20, but it's also about having meaning and community and value and having that work respected by the people around you. That we can have clean environment. And all that means, from the water that we drink to the air that we breathe to seeing beautiful trees and landscape around us. I'm over time, so I'm going to keep skipping forward. So it is just, I do want to lift up that a lot of the work that is being led here, that is happening across the country, where we have housing groups, labor groups, community organizations, environmental justice groups coming together and looking for ways to come together, is really the right direction here. And I do really want to speak to the funders in the room. We need to fund organizing. Because one of the things that we are seeing with those in power that are seeking to use hate is that they thrive on despair and loneliness. And organizing is totally about hope and community. And so it is the biggest opportunity we have to move past this period and put it behind us and say, woo, we came close, but we are doing something we never imagined we could do. And so I want to close with another, I think amazing organizer, Harvey Milk, who said, hope will never be silent. And that is we were in my little small group, we were talking about how do we sustain people. And I think that is, once you hope, once you think about the city that we deserve, the city that our kids deserve, the city I want to live in, and you have that vision, you can't unthink it again. You can't unsee it. You can't unwant it. And so I just leave folks tonight with hoping that we all go out and ignite that in our communities and think about how do we think about coming together and pulling our resources again together to win the most inclusive, best, and amazing cities that we can, and really embrace the most inclusive we the people that we can imagine. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. That was great. Great context, great data, and great framing for the whole time that we're here. So I really appreciate that. We're going to move also with Sam Williamson. He's going to be our next presenter. Sam Williamson is the Western Pennsylvania District Leader at 32BJ SEIU. You can snap, do your step, do your dance, whatever you want to do. He is the elected Western Pennsylvania District Leader of the largest property services union in the country. In 2015, Williamson led the 32BJ campaign to organize over 1,000 security officers into the union and bargain a contract with living wages for nearly 1,200 commercial office cleaners with 12 multinational employers. So that's a big job. So let's welcome Sam to present. Sam.
Thank you. Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, you can do it.
Great. So I also have the privilege of being. Can you hear me? Sorry if I don't stand behind the. I also have the privilege of being the co-chair of Pittsburgh United, and have been asked tonight, together with Carl, who is going to be there after me, to provide a little bit of the history of Pittsburgh United and our organizing work together here in Pittsburgh, and some of the lessons that we've learned in organizing and working together over the last 10 years in Pittsburgh. So I hope you guys eat a lot of those little salmon things that are going around. I'm tempted to do this. So Pittsburgh United is, as I think most folks are aware, a coalition of unions, faith leaders, community organizations, and environmental organizations in Pittsburgh that really is the place where we are trying to build grassroots progressive power in Pittsburgh. We've been around now for 10 years. This is actually our 10th year anniversary, 2017. And our board members now, I want to just call these out at the beginning so I don't forget, are the United Steelworkers, right? So we're in their house now, and we're represented here tonight by Fred Redmond and Amanda Green Hawkins, who I think left earlier. SEIU 32BJ, and I'm here, and then Nikki Lou, who's our political director, is also here. SEIU Healthcare Pennsylvania is on our board. I don't know if they're here. No, I don't think so. The Health Consensus Group is represented by Carl Redwood, who you've been here from in a little while. The United Food and Commercial Workers is on our board. So grocery store workers and others, represented by Richard Granger here tonight. Unite Here, which is the union for hotel workers and hospitality workers. The Sierra Club, represented tonight by Tom Hoffman. Clean Water Action, GASP, which is a local environmental organization called Group Against Smog and Pollution. PIN, the Pennsylvania Interfaith Impact Network, represented tonight by Lois Campbell, who is my co-chair of the board of Pittsburgh United. And Just Harvest, who's represented here tonight by Ken Riegel. And so I think, I don't know, when I think about the history of Pittsburgh United, mostly I think about where we were then and where we are now. Where we were in 2007 when we formed, and where we are now in 2017. And I'll tell a little story that helps for me to sort of frame what the work that we've done together and how far we have come really in the span of 10 years together. So, and it's about the one time we lost. And there was one time that we lost. in 2008 and 2009, our second campaign, we had a campaign called Northside United, which was a campaign to try to make sure that the development happening on Pittsburgh's North Side, which they were trying to rebrand as the North Shore, actually benefited the people and residents of the North Side and the people of Pittsburgh. And if you know anything about Pittsburgh, you know the North Side is where we have our sports stadiums. And so we tore down Three Rivers Stadium, which was owned by the public, in order to keep the Pirates and the Steelers from leaving and moving to the suburbs. And we replaced their stadiums with, as has happened in many places in America, taxpayer-funded new and beautiful stadiums. And the space where Three Rivers Stadium used to be, owned by the public, we then decided we would give the development rights of that space back to the teams and sell them that land for $8 a square foot. Some of the most expensive and valuable real estate probably anywhere between New York and Chicago, and we were going to give it back to the Steelers and the Pirates for $8 a square foot. So we had a campaign to say to the teams and to Continental Real Estate, the developer they picked to build all these new buildings, that's great that you're going to build all kind of new stuff in there, but we want to make sure that that actually also reflects what the community wants and what we need in order to build a just economy in Pittsburgh. So if you're going to build office buildings, which they were, make sure that the janitors and security officers and other folks who are working in there actually are able to have good jobs with a voice on the job and take care of their families. You're going to build a whole bunch of new hotels, and you guys maybe stay in those hotels over there. You're going to build a bunch of new hotels, make sure that the workers have a right to organize and that these are jobs that can actually lift our community. And make sure that, like, when you're deciding what you're actually going to build, that you involve the community in those decisions. They didn't like those demands very much, right? And so we did all kinds of organizing, and we had all kinds of organizations on the north side join our campaign. We had unions and community organizations, and and the homeless shelter from the north side, and all kinds of folks involved, and did an amazing job of organizing. We had great actions where we went and shut down city planning meetings and demanded they make decisions in public and not behind closed doors. We had 300 people show up with actual doors and said, don't make decisions behind closed doors anymore. And we moved the board of the Stadium Authority, which controlled all that land, to the point where they decided that they were going to refuse to sell the land to the Steelers, to Continental, and to the Pirates, because there was so much community opposition. They had an option agreement that they had a legal contract with the teams that bound them to selling that land, and we did great organizing, and they were going to not sell the land to the Steelers, so we thought we won. Then the mayor decided that he was going to fire folks off the board, remove the people who were the no votes from that board, and in one act, kill our campaign, because then they met and they sold the land, and it was essentially over. So that's where we were in 2008. One of the guys that was a board member then and got removed from the board by then Mayor Luke Ravenstall was then City Councilman Bill Peduto, and who's now our mayor. Another of the people who got removed from the board was a woman named Debbie Lestitian, who's now the mayor's chief administrative officer. Right? So where we were then was most of us who were organizing in the progressive community, most of us in labor, most of us who were running environmental organizations, most of us who were trying to make sure that Pittsburgh developed into a decent place, had very little power, had no relationship with the mayor, had very little relationship with city council, had no relationship with any of these authorities, and no matter how much great organizing we did, we were losing. Where we are today is everything I just listed is completely different, and yet we are still facing incredible challenges in building the kind of Pittsburgh that we want to leave to our kids and to generations to come. So that was our second campaign. I'm just going to quickly run through sort of the series of campaigns that led us to where we are right now. We formed, actually, Pittsburgh United originally has an acronym. Unions and neighbors invested in transforming economic development. Which the original acronym of Pittsburgh United no longer is an acronym, but we began really with this idea of, democratizing development, right? We want to take that development and make sure it reflects what we need for our communities. And the first campaign, which I think Carl's probably going to talk about a bit, was a campaign to win a community benefits agreement in the Hill District, where, again, we were building a new arena for a sports team, deciding to tear down the old Mellon Arena and replace it with a new hockey stadium for the Pittsburgh Penguins. And Pittsburgh United, really in its infancy, provided logistical support and other support work to the organizing work that was happening in the community that Carl and others were leading in order to be able to help lead and win a successful CPA campaign, and actually won a community benefits agreement from the Penguins and from the city and the county at that time. We moved into the Northside United campaign thinking this is great, we're just going to win CPAs all over the city, and we're going to transform Pittsburgh. We had that experience of losing and recognized that if we really wanted to build power, we had to also then change some laws and move into the public space and move into the arena of actually taking control of city government, so that we didn't have folks getting kicked off of boards and authorities if they decided they were going to do the right thing. And so we moved into a space of passing progressive policies, and passed in the span of about 18 months service worker prevailing wage ordinance in Pittsburgh, which says if you get public money or are a public contractor, you have to make sure that you provide prevailing wages and benefits to all of your workers. Not just the people who build the building, but the people who are going to work in the building for decades thereafter. We passed a law requiring developers that get public subsidies to do stormwater remediation to make sure that that they're not just like pumping stormwater into our already burdened sewers and making our combined sewer overflow problem even worse. And finally, we passed a law that required developers and construction companies, while they were developing, to retrofit their vehicles with diesel particulate filters, so that they weren't polluting our neighborhoods worse than they could than possible. And so we passed a whole series of laws, and in that experience began to build more power for our coalition, and put us in a position really where we were able then to, once we elected Bill Peduto as our mayor and a progressive majority on city council, begin to work much more closely with city government to do a whole, begin to work on a whole series of much more complicated policy questions, including, working to make sure the city actually does invest in affordable housing for everybody in the city, making sure that we really take on the problems with PWSA and with our water infrastructure in a way that, that builds good jobs and green communities for everybody in Pittsburgh. And to do that in a way that that is inclusive, and in which we are using every single campaign and every single legislative campaign to build power for our member organizations and for the people of Pittsburgh. So in all that work, we've learned a number of lessons that I think are really important for us to continue to reflect on and share, and we continue to learn, obviously, as we do the work together through each campaign. The first lesson that we have continued to learn and relearn is the importance of having labor partners, union partners, that are progressive and are willing sometimes to subordinate their own short-term interests and the short-term indirect interests of their own members to the longer-term interests of what we all need in order to build strong and progressive and sustainable communities. We learned that in the One Hill CBA fight, when the team offered to the unions, SEIU and Unite Here, who had members in the arena, to guarantee all of our members jobs on day one of the campaign and try to split us off from the community. And it was our saying, that's only part of what our members need. Having their jobs guaranteed is only part of what our members need. Making sure that you give back to their communities is the rest of what our members need, that help to solidify our working relationship as a coalition then, and our continued willingness to make those kinds of hard decisions every year thereafter. That is part of what is really central in allowing us to continue to work together in not just transactional ways, but really in transformative ways. The second lesson that we learned, I know I'm over time, but hold on. So the second lesson that we are really wrestling with now is the need to adapt to and recognize and adapt to our own changing relationship with power. Right? So I kind of described it a little bit, but it's one thing to be organizing when you're on the outside of power and the mayor hates you and the city council doesn't care about you and no authority will return your phone call, right? It's a different thing to be organizing when you're an ally with the folks who are in power. You're helping the mayor get elected. You help the city council hold their jobs, right? And when you're on that side of the table, but still trying to do progressive organizing work, it changes the way in which we work together in very challenging ways. And we've learned, and are continuing to learn, how to grapple with the issues that raises in as honest way of a way we possibly can. Back in 2007, we were on the brink of electing as our president, somebody who we thought was going to be a champion for everything we all cared about and were working hard to achieve. Obviously, a very different world now, right? So that impacts some of the decisions we make. So this is our third lesson. So we also learned over the course of 10 years that it can't really just be about cities. That if we do all of our organizing for progressive change work in Pittsburgh and in Philadelphia, we will lose because the rest of the state preempts everything that we are trying to do in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. We end up with national leaders like Donald Trump, whose agenda is an existential threat to all of our movements, right? And we have to move our organizing work beyond the cities. And so Pittsburgh United is actually beginning now to do organizing work outside of Pittsburgh in counties that surround Pittsburgh, because those are places where we also have to move and develop progressive power. The fourth lesson that we've really learned over the course of this time is a segue into Carl's piece, which is really the importance to recognize the ways in which structural barriers, structural racism impact every campaign that we have and interplay with all of the work that we do. We can't have economic justice and social justice unless we have racial justice as well. And so we recognize and struggle, if I can be honest with you, with the need to make sure that our coalition is diverse and includes and honors the work of Black-led organizations and Black organizers in every one of our campaigns, not just at the board level, but especially at the board level, but also in every one of our campaigns. And that is, a lesson that we grapple with and wrestle with and take into the planning phases of every single one of our campaigns. And so that is, I think, a good segue into introducing Carl, who is also a founding board member of Pittsburgh United, but is one of the best organizers in Pittsburgh, vice chair, I think now, right, of the Hill District Consensus Group, and as I said, has been on the board of Pittsburgh United since its founding back in 2007. Thank you.
As Sam already mentioned, Pittsburgh United kind of started around the struggle in my neighborhood, the Hill District. The Hill District is the historic location where Black families came to Pittsburgh and stayed in Pittsburgh in the 1940s, 30s, 20s. It was the center of the Black community for a long period of time until about 8,000 people were pushed out of our community between 1957 and 1962 to build this thing called the Civic Arena, which was the home for the Civic Light Opera, the Ice Capades, and then later on when the Penguins started in 67, it became their home. But around 2006, 2007, the Penguins threatened to leave Pittsburgh. And when they threatened to leave Pittsburgh, they said, we're going to leave Pittsburgh unless the government builds us a new arena. Once that happened, and prior to when that happened, in the community, we had started looking at what was happening in Los Angeles with the Los Angeles Community Benefits Agreement. We didn't really know what we were doing, but we were trying to study community benefits agreements and try to understand what they were and how they would work in our neighborhood. So we started to assemble some demands on how to move forward. By 2007, there was an agreement between the city and the Penguins to build them a new stadium, and that's when we really started organizing in earnest. We actually had two coalitions around the community benefits agreement. The one was started by the group I'm in, the Hill District Consensus Group, and it was called the One Hill CBA Coalition, and it was a coalition that met on a regular basis, and we argued every meeting because we never agreed on everything, but it was pretty good. And the other coalition that was started was Pittsburgh United. The way Pittsburgh United started, there was a foundation like some of you guys, a number of foundations came together and had a thing called the Dream Fund. And the Dream Fund was supposed to support people working around community benefits agreements, particularly in Pennsylvania, but maybe in other states too, I'm not really sure. But there was a grant that was put out there. So from the community, we applied for the grant, but we didn't get it because we didn't have any unions. So then we went in with Pittsburgh United, because Pittsburgh, there were unions, like particularly the SEIU and Unite Here at that time, were active in the neighborhood. So we went in with them to go after the Dream Fund, and the Dream Fund was awarded, and that's how Pittsburgh United was created. One other thing to mention, just like Sam said around the agreement that the workers in the old arena would keep their jobs and move to the new arena, one of the community agreements in the community, we agreed we would support that. Workers keep their job, workers move to the new arena, workers keep their seniority, and workers keep their union. So the people in the community agreed to that, and the unions agreed to support the struggle in the community. So it was a mutual thing. But there were two coalitions, a Black Hill District Neighborhood Organization called the One Hill CBA Coalition, and Pittsburgh United, which we in the neighborhood saw as allies for our CBA struggle in the neighborhood. There were also two models. The CBA Coalition and the Consensus Group model was to organize residents and neighborhood groups in the neighborhood. And we had about 100 organizations for the neighborhood, but it included organizations like Boy Scout Troop 93. They weren't all like large organizations, but they were all part of the coalition and had votes on the decisions that we had to make. And on the other hand, Pittsburgh United was organized as a coalition, as was mentioned, faith, labor, union, community, environmental groups. There were two strategies. Our strategy in the community was more to build power at the neighborhood level by organizing residents. The coalition type strategy was to build power, became to build power at City Hall by supporting friendly politicians. So those two strategies were kind of different, not necessarily at odds though, and I'll talk about that some more, but they were different. There are almost no black organizations in Pittsburgh United. The unions are the big players. There's a resource imbalance between Pittsburgh United and neighborhood groups. When community groups challenge our, quote, friendly politicians, Pittsburgh United is unable to really give good support to the community because they have friends in City Hall. Policy advocacy from Pittsburgh United becomes based on more what the friendly politicians will accept. Sometimes we say there's an issue that there's not authentic black leadership, or there's a lack of black leadership. There are plenty of black-led organizations in Pittsburgh. Sometimes people speak of training, so-called training authentic black leadership to accept this friendly politician strategy. This is paternalistic, not authentic. The Hill District Consensus Group participates in two different national organizing models. Since 2013, we have been a partner organization of Homes for All, which is a part of the Right to the City Alliance, using a base building model. And we're also a founding member of Pittsburgh United in 2007, which is part of the Partnership for Working Families model, using the coalition model. Both models have merit. One cannot replace the other. However, we have to beware of non-black led intermediaries for black community issues. And we have to understand that black-led organizing receives relatively little funding from foundations, and I mean relative in comparison to the coalition funding. Funding development without displacement efforts such as tenant union organizing, community land trusts, and other things should be a priority. Black-led organizing should be funded at comparable levels as coalition-style organizing. I just want to suggest that we all review a recent report that was put out. The title of the report is The Case for Funding Black-Led Social Change, authored by Susan Taylor Batten, who's the president and CEO of ABFE, a philanthropic partnership for black communities, and Nat Chioke Williams, who's the PhD executive director of the Hill Snowden Foundation. But I think it's important that we really concentrate on funding black-led social change efforts in our neighborhoods, in addition to funding these coalition-type activities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam, and also thank you for that analysis, Carl, about the distinction between intermediaries and also black and brown power building. This has been an amazing context for setting for our next couple of days together. I hope everybody kind of take it in, take a deep breath, think about how you are going to be reflecting on this throughout and how you're going to be engaging others. I do want to kind of talk about a couple of housekeeping things just so people know. One is we do have packets for those that are here, the funders. There's packets out in the front, so make sure you grab a packet before you go. The next few days, we're pretty much going to be rolling together. So, tomorrow morning there's a funders meeting at 7:30 a.m. Funders, get up, be ready, talk about strategy and all that good stuff. And then we have our learning tour, which starts around 9:30 at the Renaissance Hotel. So for folks who are going to be planning to be here, this week plan to be there. And this is just an ongoing continuation of the conversations we had. I think tonight really seeded a lot of the context, but also like the history, the political moment, and the things that we all are kind of grappling with, trying to understand how do we move forward. There's a lot of different institutions who have various strategies that are really anchored in social justice and change, and so we're going to keep riding with them to learn more about the work and get up with their work together. So that's kind of generally what's happening for tomorrow. And also I want to put a plug too. We're going to be the learning tours in the morning at 9:15. There's a lunch, and then in the afternoon there's a regional and state power building conversation. So the conversation that we're having about urban, rural, suburban, local, regional, and state conversations, we're going to kind of dive deeper into that discussion. And then there's a site visit of Southside Grocery Store, which I might actually have Alex. Yeah, somebody needs to come up here and say something about this. We're planning to have a site visit focused on the intersection of worker rights and also the things that we're talking about. And the visit is going to be optional for folks, but we really want people to participate. This is a learning and action tour, not like sit on the side and sit on the side. So we're gonna pretty much balance that, right? So we're gonna try to figure out, make sure that people is open to all participants and funders too to participate in that. Where it's pretty much a worker organizing campaign focused on the grocery store. I wanted Alex to come up here as someone to speak about the campaign itself. So one of you two, don't have me to start making up stuff. And then you're like, that's not true. I'm trying to take down the man and then.
We would be really excited to have folks join us tomorrow to go on the bus to the Giant Eagle grocery store, which is our local chain on the south side. And it'll be a chance to talk to workers and about what it's like to have a service sector job here in Pittsburgh, to hear about how that impacts their life, a little bit about how it impacts their housing or their transportation options or their education options for their kids, and what it's like to work in that grocery store and some of the challenges that they face with wages, with scheduling, with just being open about having a union in the store. So we really hope people will come and be part of that fact finding and learning from those workers. And it's part of a larger campaign that we are working on to help raise those workers up to $15 an hour and to increase their voice in their workplace. So we hope you'll join us for that. It'll be really exciting, and it'll be a chance to just interact with those workers and learn what's happening here in Pittsburgh from those folks. So please join us, and we'll be in small groups, and it'll be a great experience.
Thank you. I really appreciate you coming up here doing that. That's going to be really fun, so I'm looking forward to it. So we are now kind of closing out here for the evening. I just want to thank all the presenters today and also all the institutions that actually spoke up here. So grateful for the content and the context. I mean, I think the work that you all are doing in Pittsburgh is really a lot of the model is what's happening throughout the country, a lot of good shared learning and experiences, things like that. So for all of us, let's kind of keep grappling with thinking about the work that we all are doing in our individual locations, those that have traveled, but also thinking about, too, how do we kind of continue to figure out ways to strategically invest around power building related strategies that are affecting communities, and how do we begin to start harnessing funder and community partnership in a real strategic way, right? I think there's a lot of back and forth, but obviously a lot of the organizations that are moving the work on the ground, there are thought leaders, there are strategic partners. So I think we want to grapple with that and also deepen that relationship. So once again, thank you all for coming out. There's more drink and there's also more food, but we look forward for everybody to stay along and keep hanging out and learning together. So thanks once again for coming.